I've always had this tendency to get especially attached to the funny characters in TV shows. In Steven Universe, for example, my favorite character was Amethyst. In Breaking Bad, it was Saul Goodman, and in Attack on Titan, Sasha quickly became not just my favorite character in the show, but one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. Do note though that my love for Sasha's character is not the reason I'm making this video. I'm not trying to make a case for why she's the best anime waifu or something silly like that. My goal here is to explain why, from a writer's perspective, Sasha's role in this show is particularly clever, from her very first scene to her very last. Now, this may come as a shock to you given the lighthearted and comedic tone of her character, but Sasha's story is born out of selfishness. And no, I'm not referring to her tendency to steal food from others. I'm actually talking about this.
Maybe it's time for us to let go. Surrender the old ways.
If we turn our back on hunting, we turn our back on who we are! Why should I care about what happens to the people who've always looked down on us like we were a bunch of savages?
After the Titans breached Wall Maria, everyone who lived in that portion of Paradis was forced to retreat behind Wall Rose. But without all the resources between Walls Maria and Rose that they once lived off of, new farms had to be built in order to supply enough food. This meant cutting down the forests, the home of Sasha and her ancestors. Clearly, Sasha wanted no part of that. Why should she sacrifice for those less capable than her, right? Why should she starve to feed the people that discriminated against her all her life, and abandoned her way of life for theirs? So when her father chose to forego the old ways to help his fellow man, Sasha instead joined the military, the only place left where she could freely practice her hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Even though the times were changing for her people, even though the trees of her ancestors were being cut down in exchange for farmland, by joining the Scouts, Sasha found a way to remain in the forest.
From a certain point of view.
Her thought was that by serving in the military, she would help enable all those displaced by the Titans to someday return to their homes and once again produce their own food. That way there would be enough for everyone and people would no longer need to cut down the forest. She said as much herself after stealing some meat from the officers.
Just look at it this way. Pretty soon, we'll take back all the room we need for livestock.
As I'm sure you already know, this love for food is central to Sasha's character. Her very first scene, in fact, was eating that potato in the middle of drill, and her stealing of food is a running gag throughout the first 3 seasons. This definitely supports my claim that Sasha has a tendency to be selfish, but this serves the story in a far more important way. This is a world in which children watch their parents get eaten alive, where those in command are forced to use their own soldiers as bait, where a man who just wanted one last drink before he died couldn't even get that. In a world like this, it's difficult to look on the bright side, to find joy in such a dark world. And that's exactly what Sasha brings to the table. I mean, the infamous potato scene is just one episode after the fall of Shiganshina, but even still it manages to be one of the most wholesome moments in the entire series. After Carla died, I didn't think I'd ever smile again, but there I was laughing my butt off watching Sasha offer her commander half of her potato. And that isn't even half of the potato!
Justice is merely the construct of the current power base.
In combat, though, Sasha is far from useful. In fact, despite her upbringing, Sasha is in many ways a detriment to the Scouts. Sure, she's a very skilled tracker, and yes, she did place 9th overall in her graduating class. But if you take the time to look at each major fight she's a part of, you'll see that they all have something in common. Anytime the plan hinges on Sasha, she screws it up. In Season 1, for example, when she needed to kill a Titan in the supply room, she failed. And when she had to fire her Thunder Spear at the Armored Titan's jaw in Season 3, she missed. Throughout the entire series, in fact, she never once manages to kill a Titan. She's always either rescued by someone else, or manages to slip away by the skin of her teeth. Also notice how Sasha is never included in important discussions. For example, in Midnight Sun, Sasha is the only character who happens to be unconscious during the debate. This may make it seem like the creator of the manga hates Sasha, and well, maybe he does. But even so, there's a method to this madness. Each character in this series has an internal struggle they are trying to overcome. They each have a goal they are trying to see realized. Eren wants to kill his enemies, Hannes wants to redeem himself for his cowardice, and Armin wants to find the sea, just to name a few. All of their goals require them specifically to succeed. But Sasha's goal to help increase the food supply is the only one that doesn't hinge specifically on her success. Therefore, Sasha is the only character who can fail on the way towards achieving her goal. For simplicity's sake, let's say that every character is composed of two things: the character's arc and the character's goal. The goal is often what drives the arc, but it's important to note that the completion of a character's goal is not what completes their arc. In some cases, like it is with Hana's, these two things can coincide, but generally speaking, the character's story continues until the completion of their arc, even if they've already achieved their goal. So when Season 4 rolls around, even though Sasha's goal of increasing the food supply and saving her home has been realized, her character arc hasn't. But what do you think would complete Sasha's arc? Is it A, eating less, B, fully embracing civilization and leaving the forest of war, or C, marrying Nicolo and living a long, happy life with an abundance of food? Well, if you answered A, B, or C, you're wrong. I know, it sucks. I really wish C was right too. But to figure out what Sasha actually needs to do to complete her arc, we need to remember how it began.
Why should I care about what happens to the people who've always looked down on us like we were a bunch of savages? Screw the greater good! What about us?
She did not believe that people who looked down on her were worth caring about. She did not believe that the plight of the discriminatory was worth her time. It's their fault they have it so bad, she said. So for Sasha's arc to be complete, she had to face the true cause of the forest's woes, the real group that discriminated against her, Marley. And as she shot down the people who wronged her so, she must have thought they had this coming, just as she did all those years ago. But then she noticed a young girl, Gabby, in the midst of the crossfire. This young girl had undoubtedly been raised to hate Eldians just as Rhina, Bertolt, and Aniel had been, but even so, Sasha took pity on her. Sasha cared about someone who hated her, and she spared Gabby's life. And ironically, it's this development of her character that got Sasha killed, because the very person Sasha spared was the one that pulled the trigger on her. So with her goal fulfilled and her character arc completed, all Sasha could do was bleed to death, wishing to reap the benefits of her labor one final time. To eat one last meal. Sasha may have made it all the way to Marley, but she never really left the forest. And without Sasha's presence to bring a spark of joy into the world of Attack on Titan, the forest has become far darker indeed. Sasha's friends want to kill Gabby, a child, for her crimes. Eren and Zeke are trying to prevent their people from reproducing. Marley has launched an invasion of Paradis. And worst of all, Eren told Mikasa that he's always hated her, and proceeded to send all his friends to jail. Clearly, there is no longer any room for Sasha's lighthearted antics in this increasingly dark tale. So from a writer's perspective, she was killed off at the perfect time. Going into Season 4 Part 2, the final batch of episodes for this incredible series, Sasha's character arc leaves me asking just one question. With all these characters still in the forest, who will be the next to fall?